Let's talk about Xstate in this video. So I've been recently been playing around with Xstate, and I have created this kind of toy project which I'm going to show you how this works currently. So let's assume that whenever this page loads, you have some API call, and depending on the response you need to show a particular UI. And let's say you have three UIs, and let's assume that the UIs are predefined. Like obviously, like there can be one UI depending on the condition, and the UI depending on the condition. So let's say there are three UIs and there's an API call, and when it resolves we manipulate the data somehow and try to figure out which UI to load. So this is the app which I built. So when this initially loads, when I refresh the page, we can see loading, and then it's going to load. So currently UI2 loads first, and then I can click on a button to load UI1 and UI3 load UI3. Now on UI3, if I have some internal state change, so if I toggle the button, you can see that currently it's now step 1. So if I toggle the button here, now it's step 2. So I am in UI3 and step 2. Now if I go to UI1, and UI1 is in step 1. Now if I go to UI3 again, we can see that UI3 is still in step 2. So step or rather state is preserved when I'm toggling between states, or rather toggling between UIs. So I think it's pretty awesome, and let's try to understand how to create this application and what is this Xstate all about. So Xstate is like finance state automata on the UI side or on the front end. So I'm using the Xstate library. I'm not sure if the other libraries also available. So today morning I was looking at some other projects, and Erlang and a few other programming languages. They have a lot of states. I didn't go into it much, but for front end this is pretty solid, and you can check out. This documentation is pretty verbose, and for the most part it's going to be fine. I mean, you can just understand by reading it, but like it's much better if we can see an example, and then we can see what it looks like. So this is okay. So Xstate also has a visualizer, and this is how it looks like. There's a UI for that as well. Yep, this is the UI. So okay, so there are a few concepts we need to understand. So it's written here: machine, interpret, assign, send parent, spawn, raise, actions. Okay, machine is the actual final state automata machine, and that actually defines all the states and what is the initial state. So and if I am in a particular state, if I do something, I need to go somewhere, and okay. So let's see what this. Okay, this is not what I have written. So this is a sample machine, and this is what it looks like on the UI. So initially when it starts, it is in the initial state, which is idle. So here all the states have written here. So idle is this, and when it's on idle state and on fetch. So when it is on idle state, and if there is a fetch event triggered, then it is going to take us to loading state. Okay, so let's hit that fetch trigger, and it's coming to loading state. Okay, so in the loading state there can be two events, which is resolve and reject. So in loading, if it resolves, then it's going to go to success state, and if it rejects, it's going to go to failure state. So and on success it is final. I mean, type is final means like after that there is can be no other state. And on failure, okay, and on and in the failure state, in the events there's a retry, and in retry it is going to what is it doing? It is going to the target, is going to the loading state. And in actions, okay, let's talk about actions a bit later. Okay, so let's see what happens here. So idle, when I clicked fetch, it came to loading state, and if I click if it resolves, or if the resolve event is fired, it comes to success state, and it is a final state. Like from here we cannot go anywhere else. Now to see the reject state, I need to reset my state machine, and if I now it's an idle state again. So if I click on fetch here, it's going to come to loading, state, sorry, it's going to be loading state, and in loading state, if I click reject, it's going to go to failure state, but failure state is not the final step because we can do a retry. And if I do a retry, what it's just doing is just incrementing the number of retries to 1, and this essentially always evaluates to true, because like in JavaScript anything like all positive integers are true by essence, they're truthy. So this is going to return, like the truthy value of this is always true as a positive, so it's always going to be executed. Okay, and a retry is going to go to loading. Just wait a second. Okay, let's talk about the assign thing. Okay, so there can be a okay, so this state machine can have some memory as well, or some like I don't want to say states because state is already defined here, but let's say some memory. So that memory is called context, and in the context of this machine, it stores the variable retries. So the way we can manipulate, okay, just forget about the truthy thing. I was talking about something else actually. Okay, so this is a context, and context here has number of retries, and how we can manipulate context is with the assign function. So assign is coming from Xstate itself. So in the actions, we must select assign, and assign what, and that what is retries. So I'm assigning the variable or the object, not the object, I mean the entire context objects, the retry keys. So I'm going to assign retries key to some value, and this can be a value or a function, and function is more powerful as you can see here. So we can pass in context and the event, and here it's going to take the retries from the context. So initially retries is 0, so it's going to be 0 plus 1, which is going to be 1. So number of retry count is going to increase by 1. Does it change here? Nope, it doesn't change here. So reject, failure, retry, goes to loading again, but it doesn't I cannot see the context here, but that's fine. This is how it works. So, and that was probably the implementation of promise. Yeah, so we can see this documentation, and I'm going to use React for this project, and they in the guide, nope, in the tutorial I think, yeah, nope, in the recipe, yep. So here, like, there's an example with Vue as well and Ember as well, and I think you can implement this with other libraries, but I'm going to do it with React because that's what I'm good at. Okay, so in the guide, it's the there are more verbose information in the guide here, and like a lot of things are defined here. What is machine, what is state, what are state nodes, what are events. Events are the ones which you have just seen. Like if I'm in a particular state, I need to go to some state, it needs to listen to some event, and that is this event. Then there's transitions, and transition we already I mean it's taken care internally, like we can define it, but if you're using some module which we'll be using, so that's going to be taken care of in there. So this one for your transition here. Parallel is advanced stuff, even I also don't know about this. Effects, don't know. Actions, we just checked assign. Guard transition, this is really interesting, we need to understand this. Context, we already spoke about context. Actor, this is the internal this is the internal pattern used with this library. Final state, we already spoke about it, and rest is there, but let's not talk about that. Okay, so I'm going to open code sandbox again. Let this one stay here. This is what our final project is going to look like, but we're going to create this entire thing from scratch. Oops, not code sandbox. Yes. And let's choose React, and I hope I'm recording. Okay. Okay, so let's clear out these things, and let's create 3 UI files. So UI1.js, ui2.js and ui oops and ui3.js. The code is going to be more or less same. So import react from react, export default function ui1 return ui1, but let's wrap this inside a div div ui1. That's fine. Let's copy this and paste this in the other files as well. Just replace ui1 with ui2 and ui3, do the same thing with ui3. So ui3 is going to be ui3. Okay, so so we need two more libraries here. So we need Xstate and we need Xstate/react. Yep, this is the one. So we have those dependencies here. Whatever Xstate react will come up. Xstate/react. This is the one. Yeah, I had this now. Okay, so let's extract out the machine from Xstate. Okay, so I have the machine. Now let's create a state machine. So let's call our state machine as the root machine, and let's try to understand again how our app works. So when the app loads, let's write here something, otherwise it's feeling like pretty empty. So how our app is going to work now is when it loads, it's going to hit an API, and then when it resolves, it is going to it's going to move to or rather it's going to display the different UIs depending on the result of the response. Okay, so let's name our machine as root machine. Let's add some context here. Context means memory, and let's add some states, and let's have a initial. Okay, let's first define the states. So there can be a few states here. Let me see. First is going to be loading, because whenever this route comes up, whenever this route loads, the default state is going to be loading. So let's define the initial state. So we define the initial state first by writing initial and then the name of the state, which is loading. So we have the loading state, which is initial state, and after loading it may go to the state ui1 or ui2 or ui3, right? So the other states can be ui1 or ui2 or ui3. ui2 or ui3, fine. So on loading, we need to call a method, or we need to call a function which does a asynchronous API call, or which does a API call, and depending on that we need to do something. So the way to do that is like we can very much, okay, let's do something more first to understand this. Okay, so we have a root machine, but we're not using it anywhere right now, right? So let's bring something else to hook this machine to our React app. So import something from Xstate React, and that something is use machine. Okay, so let's do something here to use machine, and let's pass in our root machine here. Okay, so we now have our machine, which is current, and value, and another updated function called send. Now send is going to send events, the events which we spoke earlier. Where is this? Where was the events? Xstate visualization. Yep. So whenever on a particular state, I'm on a state and on something, this on is the event, so fetch is the event name. So send is going to send these events. Okay, so if I just write console dot log current dot value, I'm going to see what is the current value of my state machine, and that is loading. So when I'm loading, when I'm in the state loading, and I can check that in this way. So current dot matches, it matches which state, it match state loading, and it's going to give us true or false. And so it is in state loading, so it's true. And we can even change this to loading 1, and it will be false, because it is loading and not loading 1. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's do something. Let's write this down in our app itself, so that we're always aware what is the state of our app currently. So here let's write current state, and that is current dot value, and current state is loading, so it's always there on the UI now. Fine, we can remove this console log. So with this setup, now we need, okay, so if our current state is loading, we can have an API call in our React component itself, like API call here, and then depending on the result we can invoke, we can call the send function. But there's a better way to do that, that is to use the invoke API or invoke feature. So I think, yeah, it's called invoke, and it takes an src, which is the function, and almost all the functions in Xstate has the first parameter as context, that context here, and then second parameter as event. So here we don't need event, but we need the context, and this src is going to make the actual API call. So we are not going to make the actual API call, but we are going to fake it. So let's return a promise, because API calls are asynchronous, so let's mimic that. And promise has resolve, because our promise never rejects. And let's do a set timeout resolve. We need some value also, right? So, okay, and let's say in 1 second it resolves. So it resolves with the UI. UI is UI2, let's say. And when it so we have a src here, this is the one, yep. And when it is done, we need to do something. So on done, we need to do something, and that is on done, what is the target? On done, the target is UI2. Okay, target is UI2 only if the resolved data has the UI part as UI2. So on done is going to be target is UI2 only if only if is written as cont or condition. So target is UI2 if the condition is, and as I said, almost all the functions here has first parameter as context and second parameter is event, and only it is UI2 only if event dot data dot UI is equal to UI2. Return. So only if the data of the API response and that has the parameter UI as UI2, then we are going to go to a target state as UI2. Now the same thing we need to do for UI1 and UI3 as well. So we are going to repeat this. And the way we repeat this is to put this in an array. So we have one of this UI2, we need one for UI1. So target is UI1 if the data if event.data.ui is UI1 and the target is UI3, that's UI3. Fine. So depending on that, is going to do something. Let's refresh and see what is happening. So first is loading and then it's going to state UI2. Okay, and in the resolver, if I do UI1 and refresh, so it's going to be loading first and then it's going to state UI1. Fine. Now let's import our UIs. So import UI1 from UI1 and do the same thing for UI2 and UI3. UI2 and UI3, and let's write this here. So let's do something. Okay, let's have something like we're using React hooks here, so this assumes you're already familiar with React hooks. So use state, first is null. Okay, so what I'm thinking is whatever UI we need to pass on the screen, let's define it as in a variable, and then it's going to change depending on the current state of our state machine. So condition, we have this, and let's say UI and set UI, and we need to use the use effect hook, because on change of something we need to do something. And so switch current dot value, wrong switch syntax, and if the case is UI1, I need to do something, but same with UI2 and UI3. So UI2, UI3. Okay, now if it is UI1, set UI is going to be UI1, and this what happened, this is not default, right? Default is nothing, there's no default. I know, so default is set UI of null, because does have that. So UI1 is whatever we imported here, that is UI1. Same is going to be for UI2 and UI3. Okay, now we need to pass current value in the dependency list. That's fine. Now let's render the UI. So let's render UI. Fine. So if I refresh this, it's first is going to be loading and then UI1 is going to be loaded up. Okay, so depending on the API response, we are loading the correct UI. Now let's see how we can change the UI depending on some condition. Okay, so let's give us some space. Let's write within bold switch UI, and let's have a button here. Go to UI1, and on click of that, let's invoke send function to send event, which is go to UI1. Okay, so let's do the same thing with UI2 and UI3 as well. So go to UI2, go to UI3, just change the values to UI2 and UI3. So this is going to trigger these events, and we need let's wrap these in paragraph tags, because otherwise they're coming in one line. Okay, so okay, fine. So we have three different buttons to switch to UI2 or UI3 depending on. So currently we're in UI1. If I click on the button go to UI2, your UI2 should be loading up, but currently it's not loading because we are not listening to these events. So send is going to send these events, but in our state machine we need to listen to these events. So let's do that. So what's this? Yeah, so if I am on UI1, I need to listen, right? So I need to have the on um, object. So on, go to UI1, there is going to be target, which is okay. If I am on UI1, I don't need to go to UI1 again, so I'm not going to listen to that. So UI1 is going to listen to the events, go to UI2, and target is UI2, and go to UI3. The target is going to be go to UI, and target is going to be UI3. Fine. Okay, so that's for UI1, and yep. So UI2 is going to listen to the events, go to UI1 and go to UI3, and UI3 is going to listen to the events, go to UI1 and go to UI2. Just to recap this part, so if I am on the state UI1, I am listening to the events, go to UI2 and go to UI3. And if I got the event, go to UI2, I need to go to the target UI2. Target is nothing but the state. So if I am UI1 and I get the event, go to UI2, I'm going to go to the state UI2. Same with go to UI3. If I get the event as go to UI3, I'm going to go to target UI3, and this is going to continue. So so same thing with UI3 and UI2. So UI2 is going to take us to UI1 and UI3, and this follows. So now this listens to our things. So if I refresh, this should be working. So I currently on UI1. If I click UI2, UI2 should load, and if I click UI3, UI3 should load. Fine. Now just to make things a bit interesting, let's have something in the UI which is more fun. So let's have something like UI1. Let's have this image, and what does it say? It's a span or something. Just leave that for now, and let's increase the size of this. Let's have font size as 10. Refresh. Oh damn, this doesn't work or what? Yeah, font size definitely works, but 10 pixels is too small, so let's do 80. That's fine. Yeah, 80 is fine. So this is UI1. Let's do the same for UI2 and UI3, and let's just change the image. And same for UI3. UI3 has two emojis. Fine. Okay, so as you can see, our UIs are changing now. Okay, so let's have something more interesting now. What if each of the UIs here, they can have some separate UI themselves? I mean, they already have separate UIs, but what if they have separate states themselves? How can we incorporate that in our design? So let's discuss that in the next video.